This week began with a long weekend. Was that good? I had a great Monday, and one of the great things about Monday was not only that it was a holiday, but we had amazing weather. And I remember I woke up Monday morning and I turned to Kylie and I said, "It's a holiday today. What do you want to do?" And Kylie went, "Oh, I've actually already made plans for today." And I went, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm going out for lunch." And I said, "I'll come with you." And to which Kylie said, "It's not really like that. It's kind of a girl's thing." And I went, "Oh, okay, you go do your thing." But then I realized something. I had the best part of the day all to myself, which might not seem like much, but to any of the other parents here in the room, one of the things I've learned since being a dad is that when you become a dad, that time just to yourself gets smaller and smaller and it gets very precious. Is that true, other dads in the room? And so I thought, what am I going to do with this day? So I decided I'm going to go for a run up in the Dandenongs. And so I got all my stuff and I drove there and I found this trail to go and I started going for a run. And it was a beautiful start to the run. And I don't know if anyone's been up there lately at the moment, but there's so many butterflies in the Dandenongs at the moment. And when you're running along, they're just flying all around you, and the weather was beautiful, and it's this wonderful day, and I'm just running along and having a great time. About half an hour into it, I get a phone call from Kylie, and I've just recently got one of these Apple Watches, and it's very cool because you don't have to stop running to answer the phone. You can just keep running. So I'm running along, but I've never really used this much before, and so I press answer. "Hey Kylie, how you going? I'm just running up here in the Dandenongs." And she starts talking, but it's very crackly because the reception's not very good. So I'm running, trying to talk, and I'm looking down at my watch, being really distracted, trying to get this thing to work, going along. And while I'm running, I look down to my side, and about where that stand is one of these. Huge red belly black snake. And because I wasn't looking where I was going, I was probably about a meter from just completely standing on this thing. And it was a very sort of surreal moment. I sort of just looked across and I was like, "That's a snake," as I was running. But as I sort of started thinking about it, I started to realize how close I was actually running on this snake. If that snake was only a meter further along the trail and had stopped to sun himself a little bit further along, I probably would have landed on this snake. And who knows, I could have got bitten by a snake and it could have been a big disaster. Who here loves coming across wild animals when you're out walking in the bush by yourself? There's a couple of people up the back there. Now, I like coming across snakes, but I don't like unexpectedly coming across them when they're a little bit too close before I see them. Well, in today's story, we're going to find a man who was walking by himself, minding his own business, who comes across a very scary animal, and it's a very strange story. Because today we're talking about King Jeroboam. And who here, can I see the hands of those who feel like they know this story well? Put your hand up if you know it, you think, this is a story I really have a grasp on, King Jeroboam. Okay, not many people. And that's what's great about this story. Leading up to this, we've had Saul, David, and Solomon. And if you ask that same question for those kings, probably a lot of you would put your hands up. But when it comes to Jeroboam, for myself, I found myself going, what is this story actually about? And having to really go back. And the animal that gets encountered towards the end of the story is one of these ones. It's not a snake, it's a lion. And it's one of the most bizarre, strange stories. And I've never heard anyone really talk much about it or preach about it because it's so strange. And to be honest, I'm not going to answer all of the questions you have about this particular part of the story of Jeroboam. And in fact, if you're staying around for our discussion groups, the whole discussion group is going to be around this tricky part of the story. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to work out those questions you have together on this story. But let's dive into the story of Jeroboam, and hopefully there's something new that you discover in this story. So the story begins with King Solomon. And Fraser shared with us last week a bit about how extravagantly extravagant King Solomon was. In fact, he was so extravagant that he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, And he found these women from all over the world, and they came to his palace, and with them they brought all of their religions and their idols and their practices from all the places that they came from. And Scripture says that as Solomon loved these women, they led his heart astray from God. And so one day God sends this message to Solomon, which is basically, because you have led Israel away from me and filled Israel with all this idolatry, I'm going to tear the kingdom away from you. However, God said, because your father David was such a faithful man, and if you know the story, you might even question that statement, but because your father David was such a faithful man, I'm not going to tear it away in your lifetime, but when your son comes on the throne. And secondly, I'm not going to tear away all of it. I'm going to leave your descendants with a little part of the kingdom. And so, the kingdom will go to one of your officials. And that official's name would end up being Jeroboam. Now, when we first encountered Jeroboam, he is working for Solomon. Solomon didn't just have an extravagant number of wives. He had extravagant buildings that he built all over the empire. And in order to build these buildings, he basically enslaved his own people. And he forced them to work. And Jeroboam was one of the workers in one of these projects. And one day, Solomon was going out to inspect his project that he had been getting all these people to build, and he came across Jeroboam. And Jeroboam at this stage was very unknown, but Solomon loved what he saw in Jeroboam's work because he worked well, he worked hard, and everything he did was with excellence. And he was so impressed with Jeroboam that he promoted him to being the official in charge of the whole workforce in that part of the nation. And so Jeroboam gets this promotion, and he applies himself in the same way that he did just as a regular worker. And he really proves himself as a leader. Now, one day, Jeroboam, he's over here in Jerusalem, and he goes on this journey. We're not told where he was going, but he goes on this journey, and he's walking by himself along this road, no one else around, and he comes across something. Now, it wasn't a snake, and it's not yet a lion in the story, but he comes across a prophet. And this random prophet, his name is Ahijah, he sort of just comes and confronts Jeroboam, and he comes out and he's wearing this brand new outfit. And Jeroboam's sort of looking at what's this person about. He doesn't say any words, but then he takes off that outfit and he tears it in two. And Jeroboam's just sort of looking, going, "Oh, what's going on here?" And then he tears that again, and then he tears that again, and he tears it again, until eventually he tears that outfit into 12 pieces. And he gives 10 of those pieces to Jeroboam, and he says, God is going to tear the kingdom away from Solomon, and he's going to make you king of 10 of the tribes of Israel. And so there's this promise that one day this unknown, well, known at this stage, but originally was sort of unknown official, is going to become this incredible king. Now, along with that sort of pronouncement that one day he'll be king, the prophet gives Jeroboam this instruction. And you might recognize this as sounding very similar to the one that David gave Solomon in the story that we looked at last week. So this is the instruction that went along with this prophecy that you'll one day be king. The prophet gives this message from God saying, if you do whatever I command you and walk in obedience to me and do what is right in my eyes by obeying my decrees and commands, as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David and will give Israel to you. Now, if you were going to try and become king when there's already another king, how would you usually go about doing that? Maybe there would be a plot. Maybe there'd be a war that you would wage. Maybe there'd be some sort of strategy, some sort of thing that you would try to do. But what God is saying, if you want to receive this gift, if you want to become king, the thing for you to focus on is simply walking in obedience to me. If you just walk in obedience with me, then I will give you Israel. I'll make you king. And not only you, but your descendants can be kings as well. You'll have an enduring dynasty like David. So let's go and see how this would actually take place. And to find out the next part of the story, I need to introduce you to a person by the name of Rehoboam. Now, I get this is a bit confusing. Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And as Fraser and I have been going through sort of these kings, we found ourselves getting confused lots and lots. And just this week, we actually have a guest speaker coming, and we assigned him one of the kings, and there's actually two kings that were at the same time, had the exact same name, and Fraser and I were thinking of the different kings, and when we asked this person to do this, so we got all very confused. So the kings of Israel get confusing because they often have very similar names. So there's Rehoboam and Jeroboam. So Rehoboam is Solomon's son. He's the one that is on the line to be next in king. Jeroboam, though, is this official who God has said one day you will also be king. Now, another thing that gets confusing in this part of the story is the nation of Israel and the nation of Israel at different times actually refer to two different things. And let me unpack this for you, because if you don't understand this, when you read through these stories, you're going to get very confused. So let me give you a couple of maps here. On the left represents Israel before this story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and on the right represents the map of this area after this story of Jeroboam. Now, on the left, you see... Actually, let me just give you a bit of background here. So Israel was originally a person. His other name was Jacob, and he has 12 sons. Those 12 sons have descendants, and they go on to become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, they go down into Egypt, and they become slaves there, and God rescues them, and he brings them to the promised land, and they become a nation. That whole nation is united, and it's called the nation of Israel. And on the left here, you see the different sizes of this. So in the purple is Saul's kingdom, and then David comes and he expands it to that green area, and then Solomon comes and expands it to the whole brown area up to the very top. So this was all one big united kingdom. Well, after this story, we're going to find that this whole nation gets torn into two different nations. And the nation on the top is going to be called Israel, and the nation on the bottom is called Judah. And so this is really the story where all of this splitting, this tearing apart of the nation takes place. Now, this wasn't just a division like, say, Victoria and New South Wales. Like, there's a division there, but we still get along pretty well. But these two nations really had a serious division between them. It goes on to say in 1 Kings 14 that there was continual warfare between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, these two rival kings. And then after Jeroboam comes Abijah, and it says there was war between Abijah and Jeroboam throughout Abijah's lifetime. And soon these kings get replaced by Asa and Baasha, and there's continual warfare between them as well. And so the history of Israel and these two nations is a really violent history that goes, it's a really divided nation. So let's see how this story happens. So Solomon dies, and Rehoboam succeeds Solomon as king. And he goes along to this place called Shechem, and in Shechem they gather all of the nation together for the coronation of the new king. But when they come along, and Jeroboam's in this crowd, the people are suspicious of Rehoboam. Remember, I shared with you that Solomon basically enslaved the people, and they were getting sick of it, and they were getting taxed heavily, and they were getting sick of this as well. And so they wanted to know, will you be the same sort of king as Solomon was? And so they go to Rehoboam, and they ask this question: your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. So Rehoboam thinks about this, and he dismisses everyone. He says, go home to your homes for 3 days. I'm going to think about your question, and then come back together, and I'll give you an answer. So Rehoboam starts thinking about what sort of leader does he want to be, and he starts consulting with the different groups that are around him. So firstly, he gets all of his father Solomon's wise advisors, and he gets them together. What should I do? What should I respond to the people with? And this is what they say. They say, if you'll be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. In other words, show the people kindness, be gentle with them, and they will love you for it. Rehoboam thinks, I don't know if I want to go that approach. Let me gather my young buddies that I grew up with and see what they think should be the approach of my rulership as king. This is what his young buddies came up with. They said, say this to the people: my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. Now, that sounds pretty strong. Who knows what that means? And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. my father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. And so which one do you think Rehoboam went along with? He listens to his young buddies. And so all those people come around and they say, what sort of king will you be? And he gives them this same message that they say, I will discipline you with scorpions. And they decide they're not really very keen for that. So the 10 northern tribes of Israel, they say, we don't want anything to do with you. And they appoint Jeroboam as their king. So now we have two kings, Rehoboam on the south, Jeroboam on the north. And Rehoboam is really hurt over all of this. He's a bit bitter. He thinks, okay, I'm going to try and win them back. Obviously, I did the wrong thing. So he sends one of his officials. He tries the diplomatic approach. And the official goes up to the northern kingdom and tries to convince them to come back and join with Jeroboam. What do you think they said to this official? Well, they don't use words. They use stones, and they stone him to death. And so Rehoboam thinks, okay, well, that's clearly not working. And so he goes, maybe I'll try a more forceful approach. So he gathers this army together of 180,000 champion warriors, and he goes, we're going to go force them to reunite with the south. And as he's just making plans for this, he gets a message from God, and the message is, Rehoboam, stop what you're doing. This division that's happened, this tearing of the kingdom, is actually something that I have initiated, and stop this. And to Rehoboam's credit, he listens to God and he goes back to his palace. And so the war ends and there's sort of peace between the two nations. But then Jeroboam starts to feel in the north, he's like, okay, I'm king here now, but what if the people turn away from me? How long is this all going to last? And in fact, Jeroboam, there was one thing that really bothered Jeroboam, and that was that the temple was in the south. Now, remember that as Lani shared with us earlier about offerings, and when they went, this is a really big part of their religion. In fact, the temple was at the heart of their whole religion. And this was Jeroboam's big fear, was how will I keep the heart of the people while the heart of their religion is in Judah? And let me show you why this was the heart of religion. Well, firstly, the visible presence of God was in the temple. And that was so significant for the people. Plus, the Ark of the Covenant with the 10 Commandments in that was so symbolic for all of their history leading up to this point. That was in the temple. The sacrifices took place at the temple. And in addition to this, there was 3 yearly festivals that they had where all of Israel was supposed to go to Jerusalem, go to the temple, and they'd have this special festival. It's kind of like big camp 3 times a year. And Jeroboam's thinking, if everyone is going down to the southern kingdom over and over and over and over again, surely soon enough they're going to want to reunite with the south. And in fact, this is what Jeroboam says. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So this is the great fear that Jeroboam has. And so Jeroboam had to decide how much he trusted God. And this is really, I think, for me, the key moment in this story. Jeroboam is there and he's thinking, okay, remember that promise that God said, if you walk in obedience with me, I will establish your kingdom. So what should Jeroboam have done? Trusted? Said, you know what? God established me as king here. He can continue to keep me as king. He can look after me. He can keep me safe. He can help me to continue to prosper. I just need to be obedient to God and trust in him. I wish Jeroboam did that. Let me share with you what he does instead. And it's a really sort of a sad turn that he goes. So Jeroboam, holding tightly to his power, holding tightly to his position, decides to do this. After seeking advice, there's a few dodgy advisors in Israel in these days. So after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves, and he said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Now, what does this remind you of? Mount Sinai. And on Mount Sinai, Moses goes up into the mountain, and they're like, where's Moses? He's been there for so long. He's been there for a few days. So they build this calf, and it's this like great sin in their history. Well, that becomes the instituted official religion of the northern kingdom of Israel. And so what Jeroboam does is he creates 2 cities, Dan and Bethel, and he puts in each of those these golden calves. He builds altars in those cities, and then he creates a whole new priesthood in order to work in those new temple areas that he's created. He creates new festivals to draw the people together in those places, and he basically puts together this entire counterfeit religion that's in many ways similar. They still go and offer sacrifices. They still have priests. They still have festivals, but they don't do any of it the way that God actually asks them to do. And in fact, this has a disastrous effect in so many ways upon the nation of Israel. Let me share a verse that shows one of the things, which I think is one of the worst things that actually happens as a result of this. In Chronicles it says, the priests and Levites from all their districts throughout Israel sided with Rehoboam. The Levites even abandoned their pasture lands and property and came to Judah and Jerusalem because Jeroboam and his sons had rejected them as priests of the Lord when he appointed his own priests for the high places and for the goat and calf idols he had made. Then it says, those from every tribe in Israel who set their hearts on seeking the Lord, the God of Israel, followed the Levites to Jerusalem. So what you see happening here is the majority of people, a lot of people went along with Jeroboam's plans, but all of the people who actually wanted to be faithful to God, they leave the northern kingdom and they go down to the south. And so the northern kingdom of Israel is stripped of every person pretty much that wants to actually be faithful to God. And you can just imagine how this would have impacted the spiritual future of this northern nation. And so what we see is that in his attempts to hold on to his kingdom, Jeroboam had driven God away. And I wish that this was only something that lasted for a couple of years and that the next king came along, decided to undo all of this. But this goes on and on and on. And so Jeroboam has this son Nadab, and he becomes king. And the Bible says he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the ways of his father and committing the same sin his father had caused Israel to commit. Then comes along Baasha, and it says he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the ways of Jeroboam and committing the same sin Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. Then we get Omri. He followed completely the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, committing the same sin Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. See a bit of a pattern here? Then we get to Ahab. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, and he brings Baal worship into it as well. And as you go through every one of the kings of Israel, this same counterfeit religion with these golden calves persists all the way through for 200 years until you get to their final demise, which is described here. It says, Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned them through his servants the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into Assyria, and there they still are. So for 200 years, this false religion persists until eventually God allows the Assyrians to come and to conquer them and to take them in as captives. Pretty sad history, isn't it? But one of the things I love about the story of the northern nation of Israel is that even though Israel turns their back on God, God doesn't turn his back on them. And all the way through their history, God sends these prophets, he sends these people, and their role is to plead with the kings and to plead with the people to return to God, turn from this idolatry. It's not listened to, but God tries and he tries and he tries and he tries. Now, one of those people, those prophets, is a man, we're not told his name, but he's simply called the man of God. Now, the man of God, he was from the south. He was from down in Judah, and God tells him to go up to find Jeroboam and to give a special message to him. And so he goes on this journey, and he goes to Bethel, where one of these golden calves is, and there's Jeroboam, and he's offering a sacrifice before this calf. And this man of God comes and he gives this message to Jeroboam. And the message is basically that God is going to eventually destroy this kingdom, and God's going to destroy this false worship, and it's all going to come to this sad end. Now, Jeroboam didn't like this message. And so Jeroboam, he puts his hand out at this man of God and he says to his guards, "Seize him!" And when he does this, his hand shrivels up and his hand is like stuck out there and he's unable to bring his hand back into his body. It's this really like dramatic scene that happens. And then as that happens, this altar breaks in two supernaturally and the ashes fall out and this really sort of wild scene takes place. And then Jeroboam turns to this prophet and says, "Please pray to God for me and pray that God will heal my hand again." And so the prophet says, "Okay," prays, and God heals his hand. Now, the Jeroboam is impressed with this miracle and says, "Man of God, come to my house and I want to feed you and give you a gift and I want to give you something to drink." But God had told this man of God a special instruction for this mission. He said, "When you go to Bethel, don't eat anything, don't drink anything, don't come back the same way you went, come back a different road." And so the man of God says, "I would love to go home with you, but God has given me his instructions, and even if he gave me half of your kingdom, I would not disobey God's instructions here." And so Jeroboam wishes him on his way. He starts going home, and he meets this other person the Bible just calls this old prophet. And the old prophet says, "Come to my house and have a meal with me." And he says, God has told me, do not eat, do not drink in Bethel, and come home a different path." But then this old prophet lies to him and says, "I'm a prophet as well. An angel has visited me, and this angel has told me to invite you over to my house for a meal." And he convinces the man of God, and he goes to his house, and he has a meal. And I'm going to show you what happens at the end of this, and it's very strange. I'm just going to let the Bible speak for itself, and this is what you're going to sort of try and wrestle with a bit in your discussion groups. This is what happens next. When the man of God had finished eating and drinking, the prophet who had brought him back saddled his donkey for him. As he went on his way, a lion met him on the road and killed him, and his body was left lying on the road with both the donkey and the lion standing beside it. What do you think of that? Have you heard that story before? So here is this, he's walking back, this lion comes out, kills him, he's just left lying on there, and everyone in Israel hears what happened to the man of God who gave this prophecy, who disobeyed God, who came to this disastrous end. At the end of this, after all this, the Bible says, even after this, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways, but once more appointed priests for the high places from all sorts of people. Anyone who wanted to become a priest, he consecrated to the high places. This was the sin of the house of Jeroboam that led to its downfall and to its destruction from the face of the earth. So this is just one of the messages that came to Jeroboam and the kings that followed. And God is pleading with his people, return to me, return to me, return to me, return to me, return to me. But every one of those kings held on to their power, held on to the political significance of having these golden calves, and not one of them led the people back in revival to the true God of heaven. So there's the story. Probably a few things are new to you from that story. And the question I want to finish with is, what is the lesson for us today? What can we get from all of this, apart from just learning some interesting historical things about the Old Testament? Well, the thing that really stood out to me is how tightly Jeroboam clung to the very things that God had given him. And it's really ironic that he begins as a nobody, and God is the one who initiates this whole situation, and he comes to Jeroboam and says, I'm going to tear the kingdom away from Solomon, I'm going to give it to you. And then God does it. He works it all out so it happens just as God said. But then as soon as Jeroboam becomes king, he stops trusting that the God who made him king can continue to keep him as king. He holds so tightly onto his power, he holds so tightly onto his position that actually stops him from fulfilling that promise and that instruction that God had given him. Remember what Ahijah had said him right at the beginning of this story? If you do whatever I command you and walk in obedience to me, I will establish your kingdom. I will give you this lasting dynasty. It won't just be you, but your sons will become king, and your sons after them will become king. And there'll be this incredible story in your family. He didn't trust. He didn't trust that the God who made him king would keep him king. And so his posture towards his life was holding on to all the things that he had. clinging to them desperately. Now, I'm so glad we're not like that. I'm so glad that this is just an old story and we don't ever cling onto the things God has given us and find ourselves not following God. But maybe we do. Maybe we do. So the challenge I have for you today is, what are you holding on to? What are the things that you're holding on to, where God might be inviting you to follow him in a certain path, but you're holding on to fears, maybe. Maybe you're holding on to relationships, or you're holding on to position or a job career or whatever it might be. What are the things that you're holding on to? I want to really encourage you to follow God with your arms open, with your hands open, to trust God with your hands open. Trust that the God who brought you to this point can carry on through the rest of your life. It makes me think of a statement that Jesus made in Luke chapter 9, verse 24, where Jesus says, "For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it." And I think this is really where Jeroboam fell down. He tried to hold on to his life. He tried to hold on to all these things that he had. And in result, there's all this destruction. Half of it, we haven't begun to scratch the surface of all the destruction that happens as a result of this. But it makes me wonder, what if he actually just opened his hands? What if he just said, "God, I don't know how I'm going to remain king, but I trust you"? Imagine what the story would have been like, how different it would have been. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. Another promise that we get from God is in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And I've added there to this, with your hands open. Not clinging onto your things, but trusting God with all of your life. And lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. It's a promise I really wish that Jeroboam embraced, but it's one that we're able to embrace in our lives today. And so I want to challenge you to trust God with your hands open.